Today in the UK, 500,000 people are suffering from work-related stress. Can you believe that?
We need these breaks in order to really restore ourselves and to really step back for a moment and to get some peace in a way and to help us to de-stress.
In the US, 13% of injuries sustained at work can be attributed to fatigue.
A doctor might say to you, you need to get some rest while you recover from, say, your operation. But what does that actually mean?
And more than a quarter of people have fallen asleep at work. And even more alarmingly, 16% have fallen asleep recently while driving.
On average, people got 3 hours rest the previous day.
It's clear that we are facing a rest deficit. What can you do about it?
We need to value this because it does make a difference to our health and to our mental health.
So the rest test, maybe share some of your findings.
We found that 2/3 of people said they wanted more rest.
What about television?
People who are watching 1 hour a day of TV have higher well-being levels on average than people who aren't watching any.
Welcome back, Kwik Brains. I am your host and your brain coach, Jim Kwik. When we think about rest, we immediately think about sleep, which is a subject we've covered many times in this podcast, but it's not necessarily the same. Our guest today, Claudia Hammond, is here to share a simple yet somewhat counterintuitive message. It's time to take rest very seriously. Claudia is an award-winning broadcaster, multiple author, psychology lecturer. She is the host of All in the Mind on BBC Radio 4, which covers psychology, neuroscience, and mental health, and also hosts the weekly global health show, Health Check, on BBC World Service. In her book that we're going to be talking about today, The Art of Rest, and I'm holding this for those of you watching the extended version on YouTube. You can join us there with 1.6 million subscribers. She challenges our culture's obsession with being constantly productive, right? Busyness is a badge of honor nowadays. And drawing on the largest global study on rest ever conducted, she will reveal a startling truth. Our approach to relaxation might be all wrong. Welcome to the show, Claudia.
Thanks very much for having me.
Really looking forward to this. And for those interested in this conversation, I encourage everyone to get the Art of Rest. This was definitely one of my favorite reads this year. So much so, we're adding Claudia's book, The Art of Rest, into our book club for the month of November, I believe. And so make sure you get your copy. And to join book club, it's again, kwiksuccess.com. So probably the question, Claudia, everyone is asking is in their mind is, what is the difference between rest and sleep? And why is it important to focus on both? What is the difference in the benefits that we're receiving from each? And what's your approach there?
Yeah, it's definitely the case that they both matter. And obviously sleep is, well, hopefully being asleep. If you can get to sleep and stay asleep, then it's being asleep. And we know that has masses of benefits for your mind and for your body. And we know how very difficult it is if you are tired, and you were talking about accidents and all those sorts of things. And we know why sleep is so important now. And I think sleep has begun to be taken much more seriously. But I really want the same to happen for rest. So rest is what we do when we are awake. So it's something that's restful and it feels restorative. It feels as if it replenishes you, but it's something that you do when you're awake. So it could be having a break. It could be going and getting a cup of tea. It could be exercising. Some people find they can't really switch off that whirring that continually goes on in their mind until they have exhausted their bodies physically, and that's what really helps their minds. And for them, that will count as restful. So it's very, very individual, and people will find that different activities are the thing that feels restful for them. But you're resting if afterwards you feel a bit better than before. You feel that you are a bit restored and that you've been able to relax. I mean, it's very similar to relaxing, and that maybe you've been able to stop worrying for a while, that you've perhaps been distracted. It could be something like listening to music or watching TV that distracts you, but it takes you out of yourself for a little while and away from those worries and works as some kind of break. And we need to take it more seriously, because it's no good just being on the go all the time or asleep. We need these breaks in order to really restore ourselves and to really step back for a moment and to get some peace in a way and to help us to de-stress.
I like that. where rest is you're still awake, but there's a restorative aspect. And I want to go through some of these activities in a moment in terms of your kind of go-to. I always tell people that sometimes we're burnt out, not because we're doing too much, but sometimes I feel like we're burnt out because we're doing too little of the things that do restore us, the things that make us come alive. Now, your book is based around the rest test, and a lot of our audience, they really like the science. And, we like to interpret the science as something that can inform some practical, pragmatic things, little things that people could do when they're listening or afterwards to make a shift, right? So the rest test, this was carried out among, I think it was 18,000 people living in 135 different countries. Maybe you could explain and tell us a little bit how this test was done and maybe share some of your findings.
Yeah, it was fascinating because I was working with a group of people from all sorts of disciplines, with artists and musicians and psychologists and neuroscientists, historians, geographers, and we were all working together for a short while at Wellcome Collection. It's a big biomedical funder in London, and we were working there together on the topic of rest, and everyone was interpreting it in different ways. The composer composed a piece of music all around rests that you get in music. We looked at it in different ways, and what I wanted to know was, what do lots of people, what do thousands of people think about rest? And it's a bit confusing if you look at the evidence so far, if you look in the literature. In the medical literature, say it's not always that well defined. So a doctor might say to you, oh, you need to get some rest while you recover from, say, your operation. But what does that actually mean? And some people will interpret that to mean, oh, I can just not go to work, but I can go out with my friends and go shopping, do anything I like. Others might think, oh, this means I have to stay in bed. Others might think, well, this means I can be up and about, but I should lie on the sofa all day. So it's not very well defined. And so we wanted to know, what do lots of people think about rest? And so a group of psychologists from the University of Durham, which is in the north of England, we got together and we devised an online survey, if you like, and it was called the Rest Test. And we asked people all sorts of different things. We asked them about how much rest they get, whether they would like more rest, whether they think they get more rest or less than average, than other people. And we used all sorts of very well-used, well-defined measures to measure, say, their well-being and also people's personalities, to try to find out what are the differences that are going on here, who's getting more rest and who's getting less. And 18,000 people from around the world took part, as you said. And we found that 2/3 of people said they wanted more rest than they were getting, which is a large number. And you could say, well, people decided whether to take part or not. Maybe they took part because they're also interested in rest. But it did take a good 30 to 40 minutes to fill in.
Wow.
And so if you were really lazy, I don't think you would take part in it in the first place. So people told us that they wanted more rest. And we found that on average, people got 3 hours rest the previous day. But when we looked at well-being, we found that those who got between 5 and 6 hours rest the previous day had the highest levels of well-being. They went slightly down again when you got near, say, 11 hours. So it's not a question of, oh, if you just rest all the time, that's the best way. This is all about the rhythms of rest and activity in our lives. And so for those people whose well-being was a bit lower, who were, say, getting 11 or 12 hours of rest, maybe they were unemployed and didn't want to be, or maybe they were ill and so they were forced to rest, and so their well-being was not as high. But we were really struck by this 5 to 6 hours, and I know that might sound like a really long time. You're thinking, how on earth could I fit 5 or 6 hours resting in? But it all depends on what counts and feels restful for you. So for some people, that might be cooking the supper. If you like cooking, then that might be a restful thing. Some people may find their train journey to work, if they can stare out of the window, is restful. Other people, if they're crammed in standing in a train and not getting a seat, their commute might not be as restful. And we found that people who feel that they get more rest than average and who don't feel in need of more rest had well-being levels twice as high as the others who felt that they did need rest. So there does seem to be something going on there with rest and well-being, that it seems that it does really matter. And is something we should therefore take seriously. But I think sometimes we don't want to. Sort of the last thing we do is rest if we've got any time left, because we need to get done all the busy things that we've got to do first. And so that can make rest feel like a very low priority. But perhaps we should be changing our views about that.
So these restful activities are individual per person. Like cooking could be restful for one individual, but not necessarily, for the person, their neighbor. I'm curious, Was there, and you kind of touched on this, were there things that your team expected to be true that you found not as much? Like, were there findings that surprised you
Yeah,
in
it
this
was it
study?
was interesting. Yeah, we were very interested in the activities that people said they found restful. So we asked people to name the three activities that they found the most restful. And so we put those together. We have a top 10 and a top 20, if you like. And where we were really surprised was that things that you might expect that people do in their leisure time, like socializing or seeing friends and family or going out eating, those things didn't appear not only in the top 10 but barely appeared in the top 20.
Wow.
So those things, those socializing things, and we know how important connections are psychologically, but those may be very enjoyable but they weren't restful. And so the top 5 activities which people said that they found most restful were things that people tend to do when they're on their own, leading us to think that maybe what we need in order to get some rest is a rest from other people in a way. Like, however much you love the people around you, if they're with you, you're always considering, what are they thinking at any given moment? What are they thinking about the situation? Are they happy?
Hmm.
Is everything okay? What do they think about what you've just said? What are you going to say next? All those things are going on in our minds all the time when we're with someone else. And so a chance to be on your own, and in fact, being on your own came at number 3, seems to give us a chance to rest and recuperate a bit and be ready to go. And then you might think, oh, well, surely the people who were really outgoing, the extroverts, surely they would find being with friends restful. But even then, because we looked at a personality measure, so we knew who the extroverts were. If we took the people who were the most extroverted, still these activities that people did on their own came up as the most restful, because it's different from what's enjoyable. It's what's restful. And it seems that we do need a bit of that as well.
And they're disconnecting to maybe reconnecting with themselves. So if being alone was number 3, can I ask what 2 and 1 are?
Yeah. So at number 2 was being in nature. And most people found that restful. So 53% of people had that as one of their top 3. And then number 1 was surprising, actually. Nice for people who write books like me, but number 1 actually was reading.
Yeah.
58% of people said that they found reading restful. Now, that is really interesting, because reading involves, of course, some cognitive effort. You've got to, read the words, think about what you've read before and how that fits in, and work out what it all means. And you have to concentrate. And it was interesting that came top. And I think all of these activities are telling us something about the essence of rest in a way. And I think one of the things about reading is that, again, it takes you away from your worries. It takes you into this other world, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. It's often about either something else or someone else or somewhere else, but it takes you away from yourself. And also, it's a really good jumping off point for daydreaming. And so there's research showing that people aren't always concentrating when they're reading. And you must have had that, where you read the whole page and you think you were concentrating, you realize you've got to the bottom, your eyes move down, but you weren't actually concentrating at all. You read it again and you read it a third time, and then you maybe give up because you think, this is just not going in, I'm just not concentrating. And studies have found that some of the time people are doing this, and you can tell this by, you can actually track their eye movements. And so you can tell whether they're concentrating or not, because if we're concentrating, your eyes slow down very slightly if there's a long word or a really unusual word. But if you're doing what psychologists slightly judgmentally call mindless reading, then your eyes go along at a regular pace. So you can find that some of the time people aren't concentrating. But I don't think we should beat ourselves up about that, because it is, what it means is that maybe you are daydreaming about something else. And books are a good jumping off point for that, because they take your mind elsewhere. They make you think about all sorts of things, and that makes you remember things and make other connections and think about other things. And that's okay, because we know that there are some real benefits from daydreaming if you're not ruminating about something negative. If you're ruminating about something negative again and again, then there's plenty of evidence that that's not good for your well-being. But if what you're thinking about is something nice, then and different possibilities, then we know that there are benefits from that, particularly for things like creativity. So it's okay to daydream. And in fact, daydreaming came at number 8, which I thought was interesting, that actually people were saying they found this restful. Letting their mind wander a bit was a thing they found restful.
I love that. We have one of the largest communities of readers in the world. for our speed reading program. We have students in 195 nations. We get a lot of feedback, and I've had the opportunity over the years. I've been doing this for 32 years. Sit in labs and where they do these eye tracking exercises and assessments. And reading definitely takes a cognitive load, right? It takes a significant amount of cognitive power. I always tell people reading is to your mind what exercise is to your body. And it could be in a way, sometimes people would say it's depleting around their minds, because it could take, again, a certain amount of focus and mental energy. It was interesting. What about television? How did, it could be, I don't know if this is controversial, as a resting activity. What does, I don't know what the stats are in terms of the average person, how much they consume in terms of television or Netflix or what have you. Did that make the top 10? You have too much to read, but too little time. Studies have shown that your ability to read is directly correlated to your level of success in life. But when was the last time you took a class on how to read? I want to introduce you to the Kwik Reading free masterclass. In this free training, I'll show you how to instantly increase your reading speed by 25 to 50% or more. Plus, you'll boost your understanding, your comprehension, your focus, and concentration along the way. Don't miss out on this life-changing opportunity. Click the button or go to jimkwik.com/speed to access this free training now.
Yeah, it did. It was interesting. It was at number 9, and we counted watching TV could be streaming or, whatever they were doing, watching moving pictures on your screen. And that did come at number 9 and was something people said that they found restful. And it's interesting. I think this feeds in again into the rest from other people, in that a lot of the time people are watching TV in parallel with someone else, and that actually it's a really nice activity to do with someone else, because you haven't got to talk, but you can if you want to. But you've got this shared focus on something else. And what you're looking at is essentially stories, again, whether it's, documentaries or reality TV or dramas. What you're looking at is stories. And in a way, since the dawn of time, people have sat around the fire and, exchanged stories. And now we're lucky enough to have them realized by, the best directors and actors in the world can make something completely amazing and gripping and interesting to us. And again, I think it takes us out of our world for a while. And if you look at all the evidence on watching TV, then yes, if people watch a lot of it, then there do seem to be poor associations with well-being. So your well-being is lower, say, in people who are watching 5 or more hours a day. But people who are watching 1 hour a day of TV have higher well-being levels on average than people who aren't watching any. And I think and sometimes people will say, oh, but it's empty time, you don't remember it afterwards. Well, that all depends what you watch. So, I will remember some scenes from some amazing dramas forever, like things like Breaking Bad and The Wire and things like that were so amazing that I'll remember those things for a very long time. And so I think it's a question of just, deciding carefully what you watch so that you're not wasting your time, so that it is something valuable. And that this is something that people where they can feel restored afterwards. And after all, it is in a way a very, very popular activity. It is many people's go-to of an evening. If they've finished everything, they've eaten, they've got the kids to bed, and there's a bit of time, is to sit and watch something. And I think maybe people shouldn't feel too guilty about that. One of the things that really struck us was that some people said that they felt guilty every time they rested. Yeah. And this is the biggest thing. I've spoken at lots and lots of book festivals and science festivals and other events and public events about rest. And the main thing that people have come up to me and said is that from reading the book, they learned that you don't have to feel guilty about resting. And some have said that, they find that a kind of life-changing insight, that they don't need to feel guilty, that it is okay because there are benefits. And there are real benefits for our mental health of resting, just in the way that, I don't feel guilty when I go running because I know that is good for me physically and good for me mentally. And one of the biggest changes I've made actually is not feeling guilty anymore about doing something that's restful or taking a break. I love gardening, and I've got a small garden and a tiny greenhouse. And And when I was, working from home, I did used to sometimes go out into my garden for, say, 10 or 15 minutes and have a little potter and deadhead things. And I always felt a bit guilty about it. And now I deliberately don't feel guilty, because I think what I'm doing is I'm protecting my mental health for the future and for now, just as I protect my physical health by going running, that this is another thing I'm doing to protect myself. And if you can find the right activity for you, then you can feel those kind of whirring thoughts start to disappear. And, the moment I go out into the garden and start engaging with the plants and with what's going on, I completely forget for a moment what I was worrying about and what I was doing, say, work-wise, and concentrating on and thinking, oh, there's too much of this and this is all really stressful. So if you can find that activity, that can make such a difference, and not feel guilty about it. Give yourself permission to rest.
It's interesting that there's diminishing returns on something like binge watching television. There's certain benefits, but also it could certainly not be as rewarding and maybe even detrimental by spending more time. Is there a minimum amount of minutes that qualifies as rest? Or do you have a recommendation? Let's say somebody's taking a little bit of a brain break from work and they only had 10 minutes. Can they do something that would count as a restful or energy restoring activity?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the research on micro breaks I think is really interesting, because sometimes people will say, and it's a absolutely fair point, they'll say, but I've got a job or two jobs and kids to look after, parents to look after, there is no time to rest. And I absolutely get that. But micro breaks can make a real difference. And some of the research on that is really interesting. And often what we do is we make our breaks a reward for when we finish something, particularly if we're up against a deadline. So there's some really interesting German research that found that this is a thing we often do. So you've got, an hour and a half left to get this project finished and get it in. And so you think, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get absolutely head down. I'm going to get that done. And then I'll go and make a cup of tea afterwards. And actually, because we know that our attention and our focus can increase if you've had even a really short break, actually, you should go and get that cup of tea now and come back with it, because you'll be more focused and able to concentrate better. So if you possibly can, even taking a 2-minute break up to your deadline can help. There was an interesting study done in South Korea where they got people to take micro breaks throughout the day, every hour or so, just 2-minute micro breaks, where people could, say, stare out of the window or doodle or lean their head back in their chair and just shut their eyes but stay awake, or go and get a drink and bring it back to their desk. So tiny short breaks. And they found that an hour later, their attention levels were still higher. And at the end of the day, their well-being was higher. So even fitting in short breaks can make a difference. And I'd say, I say to people, you want to get a personal prescription for rest. So it's a good idea to work out, well, what are the activities that I find restful? To start noticing what is it you find restful, and then try and work out how you can fit short amounts of that into your day, even if it is only 2-minute breaks. Just getting up and walking around does make such a difference.
Our company, we do a lot of corporate training at Facebook, Nike, SpaceX, Google, doing mental fitness training, brain optimization, accelerated learning around speed reading and memory. I'm curious how, knowing all that you know, all the research that you've compiled, when you're looking at a workplace or a school, and how would you go about encouraging or implementing these like rest activities as it's shown to increase productivity in a world where, in a workplace where you always have to be working, right? Is there, what would you say to somebody, like maybe somebody's listening, they want to bring this to their manager, the idea of creating a rest break or incorporating rest activities to be able to convince them that it's worthwhile and it's not just them kind of not working.
Yeah, so I've been in, talked to lots of companies, and I think that it's a question of showing people the evidence. Thankfully, companies and organizations, many of them are taking mental health much more seriously now. And they want their staff to be well, and they want their staff to be productive, but they also don't want their staff to be feel miserable and stressed and to leave, and particularly at the moment where it's, recruitment is harder. And of course, you want to have happy staff, and happy staff do well. And so I think it's a question of looking at that evidence to be able to say, well, look how beneficial breaks are. They do make a difference. They do help you to concentrate better. and that you will actually get more done, not less, by having those breaks, but more importantly, that you will feel happier and less stressed. And then I think it's a question of incorporating that into the culture, which will start with leaders showing leadership by doing this themselves, and not, if they're seen being there till 10 every night and not ever taking a break, then that's not a good example to set for people below. But also, I think it has to be realistic, or you can just annoy your staff. So if you just say to your staff, oh, you've all got to take breaks, it's really important, but you're overloading them with so much work and with perhaps more work than they used to do because they might be doing other people's jobs as well if numbers have been cut, then it's got to be realistic in terms of their workload. Otherwise, it will just, annoy people more. But I think it's interesting that schools say, in the UK, senior schools used to have breaks in the afternoon. When I was at school, there was a break in the afternoon as well as morning and lunchtime. And now only 1% of schools have that afternoon break. And so there is so much to fit in that the breaks are what disappears. And we need to value those. I say to people, put your breaks in your diary rather than see, well, what space is left at the end when I've done everything else. We need to value this because it does make a difference to our health and to our mental health. And so put those breaks in your diary so that you do have a break. Schedule breaks between many people. If they're working from home now, we'll have back-to-back Zoom meetings. And that's really, really tiring and hard to concentrate in, is to try to don't always start them on the hour so that you can fit breaks in around those times as well, so that you're not just stuck in front of your screen.
I think this conversation is extremely valuable just to shine a spotlight on this very essential activity of rest, because I imagine some of the listeners, they either feel like they don't have time to rest, or they feel guilty if they did, some of these restful activities because they're not doing something, quote unquote, productive. And this is, in a way, making people feel seen, and also encouraging people that this is valuable. Even we have an acronym. We use a lot of acronyms with what we do, and I did one recently called Refuel, where the R stands for rest, and it's the starting place for all. Then you have exercise, foods, us, meaning, this, positive peer group. E is environment. L is always like the learning part. I'm curious, having wrote The Art of Rest, has it changed your own approach to rest in any way? And maybe what is a key takeaway do you hope readers will gain from the book?
What I have done is to give myself permission to rest, and to see that this is a good, valuable, positive thing. This is good for my mental health. This is protective, and a way of, taking care of myself so that I can do all the work and all the fun things as well that I want to be able to do. The other takeaway is that busyness can become a badge of honor. It can become something where we may feel very busy, but also we'll say to people how busy we are, because when they say, how are you? We'll say, oh, I'm really busy, a bit too busy. But how much is that really a claim to status as well, by saying, look how busy I am. I must be really wanted. I must be really important. And that actually we shouldn't be valuing busyness for its own sake in that way. That it should be possible to say to people, well, you know what, I've been having a bit of a rest, or I've been trying to fit in some other things, and I'm trying to look for a different balance in life between activities and restfulness. That should be okay to say, and should not be something to be embarrassed about. And we should start, taking it seriously, because it really does matter to our mental health.
I love it, Claudia. We're excited to have you in our book club later this year. Everyone get your copy of The Art of Rest. How can people get their book and stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so the book is, in bookshops and, online at the big retailers and others. And my website is claudiahammond.com, and I'm on Instagram at Claudia Hammond, and Twitter as well. So you will find me on all of those places.
Outstanding. Well, I really appreciate it. As always, we'll put all of the sites to Claudia's book, social media, her own website at our show notes, jimkwik.com/notes. So, Claudia, thank you so much again for joining us, and I really look forward to having you in our upcoming book club.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and the book club's going to be great. Really looking forward to it.
Everyone could go to kwiksuccess.com to enroll in our book club. And as we've learned today, rest isn't a luxury. It's not a sign of laziness. It's a non-negotiable. It's an essential component of a healthy, productive, and more fulfilling life. So I challenge everyone listening to take what you've learned in this conversation and share maybe on social media, and you could tag Claudia, tag myself, just one way you're going to incorporate more intentional rest into your day. And I would love the feedback, how it impacts your energy, your focus, your overall sense of happiness or well-being. I want to remind everybody that we should recharge ourselves like we do, I don't know, our phones, right? You have permission to rest. You are not responsible for fixing everything that is broken. You don't have to try to make everyone happy. Remember to take time to rest and recharge and replenish. And as always, you can find more ways to fuel your brain's potential on our YouTube channel, where we post the extended version of this conversation. So make sure you do that also as well. And make sure you hit the subscribe button there, leave a comment on what you thought about this episode, any questions that you might have. We look forward to seeing you in book club. Claudia, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is your brain coach, Jim Kwik. Until next time, everyone, be limitless.